The small-town convenience store buzzed with the sounds of a summer day, rustling bags, hurried footsteps, and the faint hum of the air conditioning struggling against the heat. Alia pushed open the glass door, the little bell above jingling softly, and stepped inside. Her heart raced as the cold air hit her face. She always felt a little nervous in places like this, even though she had no reason to. She wasn't doing anything wrong. All she had to do was pick up a few groceries for Mama Pearl, just like any other day. But deep down, she already knew this wasn't going to be like any other day. She clutched her list in one hand and the faded strap of her canvas bag in the other, moving carefully through the aisles. Alia had been raised to always be polite, to never give anyone a reason to doubt her intentions. You have to be twice as careful, Mama Pearl always said. People will see what they want to see. It wasn't fair, but Alia understood. She had seen it in the way store clerks watched her, in the way strangers crossed the street when she walked by. She felt it now as she reached for a loaf of bread and caught the eyes of the woman behind the counter. Janice. Everyone in town knew her. Mid-40s, with tight blonde curls that looked like they hadn't moved since the 80s. She was tall and always wore lipstick a shade too bright, her sharp gaze slicing through customers like a knife. Alia had seen her before, overheard her sharp comments about kids these days, and people who don't belong. But today, Janice's eyes followed her every step like a hawk tracking its prey. Alia tried to ignore it, focusing on her list. Bread, milk, eggs, a few cans of soup. Mama Pearl liked the chicken noodle kind, and Alia smiled to herself as she placed a can gently in her basket. She thought about how her grandmother would hum softly while she stirred the soup on the old stove, the smell filling their tiny kitchen. That warmth gave Alia courage as she approached the counter. Janice's lips curled into a smile that wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that made your skin crawl, like she was already planning what to say before Alia even opened her mouth. Alia set her items on the counter, careful not to make a mess. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steady but soft. Janice didn't respond right away. She scanned the bread with a loud beep, then the milk, her movements slow and deliberate. Her eyes flicked up, narrowing. "You sure you can afford all this?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Alia froze, her hand tightening on the strap of her bag. She had heard comments like that before, but not so directly. Not here, in front of other people. Her cheeks burned, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Yes, ma'am," she said, her voice quieter now. "I got a card." Janice let out a short, sharp laugh. "A card, huh? Let me guess. It's not yours." The words hit Alia like a slap. She glanced around, noticing that a few customers had stopped to watch. Her throat tightened, but she refused to let the tears come. "It's mine," she said, holding the card out for Janice to see. Janice didn't take it. Instead, she leaned back, crossing her arms as her smile grew sharper. "You kids think you can just walk in here, flash something shiny, and get away with it. I've seen it all before." Alia's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the eyes on her now, the weight of their stares. She tried to steady her voice. "It's my card," she repeated, her hand trembling as she held it out. Janice snatched it from her, holding it up like it was some kind of evidence. "We'll see about that," she said loudly, looking around at the growing crowd. "Maybe someone here recognizes this card. Anyone?" The murmurs started then, soft at first, but growing louder. Alia felt like the room was closing in on her, the walls pushing her toward the counter. Her palms were slick with sweat, and her knees felt weak. But she refused to break. She wouldn't give Janice the satisfaction. "Can you just run it?" Aliyah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, I'll run it," Janice said, smirking. "But if it bounces, don't say I didn't warn you." The beep of the scanner felt deafening. The machine processed the card, and for a moment, Aliyah held her breath. Then the receipt printed with a loud whir, breaking the tension like a snapped wire. Janice frowned, clearly disappointed, as she tore the paper and shoved it toward Aliyah. "There," she said, her voice flat. "Guess you're luckier than I thought." Aliyah reached for her bag, but Janice wasn't done. "Next time, maybe shop somewhere more. Your speed," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Wouldn't want people getting the wrong idea." The room erupted in laughter, cruel and cutting. Aliyah's vision blurred as she grabbed her things and rushed toward the door. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Her legs carried her out into the heat, her chest heaving as she gulped for air. Behind her, Trey lowered his phone, his jaw tight. He had seen enough. The anger in his chest burned like a fire, but he kept his voice calm as he approached Aliyah outside. "Hey," he said gently, holding up his phone. "I got it all, every word." Aliyah looked at him, her eyes wide and wet. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she nodded, clutching her bag like it was the only thing holding her together. "We're going to fix this," Trey said, his voice steady. "I promise." The faint sound of rain tapping against the window was the only thing breaking the silence in Mama Pearl's living room. Aliyah sat at the small wooden desk in the corner, her pencil scratching furiously across the pages of her notebook. She had a math test tomorrow, and even though she was confident she'd ace it, she wasn't taking any chances. Across the room, Mama Pearl sat in her favorite armchair, her hands busy knitting a scarf with slow, deliberate movements. Every so often, she glanced over at Aliyah, her face softening with a smile. "Don't forget to breathe, baby," Mama Pearl said, her voice warm but firm, like the hum of an old gospel tune. "I'm fine, Grandma," Aliyah replied without looking up, her pencil still moving. "Just one more problem." Mama Pearl chuckled quietly and shook her head. "One more always turns into 10 with you. I don't know where you get that stubborn streak." Aliyah paused, the pencil hovering mid-air, and grinned. "Pretty sure I get it from you." Mama Pearl laughed louder this time, the sound filling the room like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Well, you ain't wrong about that." It was moments like this that kept Aliyah grounded, even when the world outside felt heavy and unforgiving. Mama Pearl had been her rock for as long as she could remember. After Aliyah's parents passed away in a car accident, when she was just 5 years old, Mama Pearl had stepped in without hesitation. She was already well into her 60s then, but she carried the weight of raising a child like it was what she was born to do. Mama Pearl wasn't like the other grandmothers in their small neighborhood. She was tough but kind, with a voice that could soothe any storm and eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. Aliyah had grown up hearing stories about her grandmother's life, how she'd fought to keep their family's dignity intact during some of the hardest years in their community, how she'd worked long hours as a seamstress just to make ends meet, and how she'd never let anyone look down on her for the color of her skin. "You remember what I told you about that word, baby?" Mama Pearl asked, setting her knitting aside and leaning forward slightly. Aliyah looked up, tilting her head in confusion. "What word?" "Just, like when you say you're just fine or just trying," Mama Pearl said, her tone serious now. "You ain't just anything. You're more than enough. And don't you let nobody make you think otherwise." Aliyah nodded, the weight of her grandmother's words sinking in. It wasn't the first time Mama Pearl had said something like that, but tonight it felt different. Maybe it was because of what had happened earlier that day at the store. The way Janice had looked at her, the way her words had cut so deep. Alia hadn't told Mama Pearl about it. Not yet. She didn't want her grandmother to worry. But the memory still burned in her chest, and no amount of math problems could erase it. Mama Pearl leaned back in her chair, watching Alia closely. "You've got a lot on your mind tonight, don't you?" she asked softly. Alia hesitated, her pencil tapping against the desk. "It's nothing," she said finally, forcing a small smile. Mama Pearl raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Nothing doesn't usually make your shoulders sit up by your ears like that." For a moment, Alia thought about brushing it off again, but the words spilled out before she could stop them. "It's just, people can be so mean sometimes, Grandma, for no reason." Mama Pearl's expression softened, and she nodded slowly. "They can be, baby. But that's their burden to carry, not yours. You hear me?" Alia nodded, but the knot in her chest didn't loosen. "But what if it doesn't stop? What if they always see me like that? Live and I belong." Mama Pearl reached out, her hand warm and steady as it rested on Alia's. "You belong everywhere you set your feet, child. Don't let nobody tell you different. You've got a light in you, Alia. Some folks might try to dim it, but that's just because they can't handle the shine." Alia looked down at their hands, her grandmother's skin weathered and strong, like the bark of an old oak tree. She wanted to believe those words with everything in her. But the world outside this room felt so much bigger than her sometimes. The next morning, Alia woke early, her mind still replaying Mama Pearl's words. She grabbed her backpack and headed out the door, the crisp morning air waking her up as she walked to her part-time job at the diner. It wasn't glamorous work, but she didn't mind. Every dollar she earned brought her one step closer to college, one step closer to the dreams she had for herself and her family. The diner was already busy when she arrived, the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee filling the air. Alia tied her apron around her waist and got to work, balancing plates on her arms like a pro. Most of the regulars greeted her with a smile, but there were always a few who barely looked her way, treating her like she was invisible. She'd learned to let it roll off her back, but today it was harder than usual. During her break, she sat in the alley behind the diner, scrolling through her phone. That's when she saw it. The video Trey had posted of her encounter with Janice. It was everywhere now, the comments pouring in faster than she could read them. Some people were angry on her behalf, calling for justice. Others weren't so kind, accusing her of overreacting or even lying. Alia's hands trembled as she locked her phone and pressed it against her chest. She hadn't asked for this. She didn't want to be the center of attention, didn't want her life dissected by strangers. But deep down, she knew this was bigger than her. This wasn't just about a rude store clerk. It was about all the times she'd been made to feel small, all the times she'd swallowed her pride to keep the peace. That evening, Trey stopped by her house. He knocked softly on the door, and Mama Pearl answered, her sharp eyes taking him in. "You must be Trey," she said, her tone both curious and cautious. "Alia's told me about you." Trey nodded, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to check on her, see how she's holding up." Mama Pearl stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. Alia was in the kitchen, her hands busy washing dishes. When she saw Trey, she dried her hands quickly and smiled. "Hey." "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "I just wanted to see if you're okay. The video, it's really taking off." Aliyah glanced at Mama Pearl, who was watching them from the doorway. "I saw," she said quietly. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this." "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," Trey said quickly. "But people are listening, Aliyah. They're paying attention. This could make a difference." Aliyah looked at him, her heart pounding. She thought about all the stories Mama Pearl had told her, about the time she had stood up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. Aliyah had always admired her grandmother's strength, but now she wondered if she had that same strength in her too. Mama Pearl stepped forward, her voice steady. "You've got a choice to make, baby. You can let this moment pass, or you can use it to shine that light of yours. But whatever you decide, know this, you are not alone." Trey nodded, his eyes full of quiet determination. "She's right. We're with you." Aliyah took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling as the weight of their words settled on her. She didn't know what the next step would look like, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't walking this path alone. The video hit the internet like a spark landing on dry wood. Within hours, the clip of Janice sneering at Aliyah and calling her card probably stolen had spread across local social media circles. People shared it with captions like, "This is why our town needs to change," and disgusting behavior from someone in customer service. But not everyone was on Aliyah's side. Some people commented things like, "We don't know the whole story, and kids these days just want attention." Others went further, calling Aliyah entitled or accusing Trey of staging the entire thing. Aliyah didn't see any of this at first. She was at home with Mama Pearl, doing her best to push the memory of Janice's voice out of her mind. Trey, on the other hand, couldn't stop watching the numbers climb. The views ticked up by the hundreds every few minutes. He sat at his desk, his phone buzzing with notifications. People were reaching out to him, friends, classmates, even strangers, telling him they were proud of him for standing up for what was right. But there were also angry messages. "You're just trying to ruin someone's life," one said. "This isn't activism, it's bullying," said another. Trey frowned at his screen, the glow from his laptop reflecting off his glasses. He had known this would get attention, but he hadn't expected the backlash. He opened his messaging app and typed a quick text to Aliyah. "Hey, the video is blowing up. Are you okay?" Aliyah's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, but she didn't pick it up. She was sitting across from Mama Pearl, staring at the steam rising from a cup of tea. "You're quiet tonight, baby," Mama Pearl said, her knitting needles clicking softly. "What's on your mind?" Aliyah hesitated, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic mug. "I just keep thinking about what happened at the store," she said finally. "I should have said something. I should have stood up for myself." Mama Pearl set her knitting aside and leaned forward, her eyes full of that steady, unshakable wisdom. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away," she said. "But that doesn't mean you stay silent forever. When the time is right, you'll find your voice." The next morning, Aliyah woke up to a dozen texts from Trey, all variations of "call me" or "you need to see this." She groaned, rubbing her eyes as she unlocked her phone. Her stomach dropped when she saw the video. It wasn't just the footage that hit her, it was the comments. Strangers were talking about her like they knew her, some defending her, others tearing her apart. Her hands shook as she scrolled, her breath coming faster with each swipe. She shoved the phone under her pillow and curled into a ball, wishing she could disappear. A knock at the door startled her. "Aliyah?" Mama Pearl called softly. "Trey's here to see you." Aliyah sat up, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure she was ready to face anyone, not even Trey. But when she opened the door and saw the look on his face, equal parts concern and determination, she knew she had to try. "Hey," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hey," Trey replied, stepping inside. "I know it's a lot. Believe me, I didn't think it would blow up like this. But people are talking about it. They're talking about you." Alia crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "I didn't ask for this, Trey. I just wanted to buy groceries." "I know," Trey said, his voice softening. "But this is bigger than that now. People need to hear your story. They need to know what it's like." Alia shook her head, tears pricking her eyes. "What if they don't believe me? What if they think I'm just making a big deal out of nothing?" Trey stepped closer, his expression fierce. "It's not nothing, Alia. And anyone who says it is doesn't understand what it's like to be treated like you're less than just because of who you are. You don't have to do this alone. I'll be there with you, always." Later that week, a local reporter reached out to Trey, asking if Alia would be willing to do an interview. At first, she said no. The thought of putting herself out there, of being judged even more, was terrifying. But Mama Pearl's words echoed in her mind. "When the time is right, you'll find your voice." Maybe this was that time. Maybe this was her chance to be heard. The day of the interview, Alia wore her favorite yellow blouse, the one Mama Pearl had made for her. It felt like a piece of armor, light but strong. She sat across from the reporter in a quiet cafe, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Trey sat nearby, his camera ready to capture the moment. The reporter started with easy questions: her age, her school, her future plans. But then she asked, "Can you tell us what happened at the store that day?" Alia's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "I went in to buy groceries for my grandmother," she said, her voice steady. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. But the clerk, she made me feel like I didn't belong, like I wasn't good enough to be there." The reporter nodded, her pen moving quickly across the page. "And how did that make you feel?" Alia hesitated, glancing at Trey for reassurance. He gave her a small nod, and she took a deep breath. "It made me feel small," she admitted. "But I'm not small. I'm not less than anyone else. And I'm tired of being treated like I am." The interview aired the next day, and it wasn't long before it started making waves. Some people praised Alia for her bravery, calling her a role model. Others weren't so kind. Janice, furious about the video and the interview, started spreading lies around town. She told anyone who would listen that Alia was trouble, that she had a history of causing problems. A few people believed her. One of Mama Pearl's neighbors, who used to wave every morning, stopped acknowledging them. At the grocery store, Alia overheard someone whispering, "That's the girl from the news," always looking for attention. The weight of it all pressed down on Alia like a heavy stone. She came home one afternoon to find Mama Pearl sitting on the porch, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of tea. "Sit with me, baby," Mama Pearl said, patting the seat next to her. Alia sank into the chair, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know if I can do this, Grandma," she said quietly. "People hate me. People who don't even know me." Mama Pearl reached over, her hand warm and steady on Alia's. "Some folks will always find a reason to hate, baby. But that doesn't mean you stop shining. You hear me?" Alia nodded, but the knot in her chest didn't loosen. She looked out at the street, where the sun was setting behind the trees. The light filtered through the branches, casting long golden shadows. She thought about everything she had been through, everything she had endured. And for the first time, she felt a spark of something stronger than fear. She felt determination. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice firmer now. "Tomorrow, I'm going back to that store. I'm not going to let her win." Mama Pearl smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "That's my girl." The first click of the mouse felt like a key turning in a lock. Aliyah wasn't sure what she was expecting to find, but something pushed her to keep going. Trey's words echoed in her mind. "The truth is out there, Aliyah. You just have to dig." The video had gone viral, more than just a local sensation. People from all over the country were watching, commenting, debating, and rallying behind her. It felt surreal to Aliyah, like the whole world was suddenly looking at her. Some of it was uplifting, even empowering, but the hate, the trolls, was something she wasn't prepared for. The anonymous people who threw insults at her behind the anonymity of their screens. "Get over it. You're just looking for attention." She stared at her phone, hands trembling as she scrolled through endless comments. They said things like, "She's just a kid. Why is everyone so sensitive?" And that's what happens when you play the race card. It burned. It stung in a way she hadn't expected. "Don't mind them." Mama Pearl's voice broke through, calm and certain, as she sat down beside Aliyah on the couch. "They're hiding behind their screens. You've got a real face, Aliyah. A real story." Aliyah glanced up at her grandmother, the warmth of her presence a comfort, but the anger was still there, bubbling inside her chest. "But it hurts, Grandma. It really does." Mama Pearl nodded, her eyes understanding. "I know, baby. But you don't let them see that. You rise above them." Aliyah swallowed hard, a lump in her throat. She didn't want to rise above anything. She just wanted to be left alone. She didn't want to feel like she had to prove herself anymore. But there was something inside her that wouldn't let her walk away. Trey had been insistent. "You need to dig deeper, Aliyah. There's more to this. If people are going to believe you, they need the full story." So that night, with Mama Pearl sitting in the chair beside her, Aliyah took a deep breath and began her search. She opened the browser and typed the name of the store into the search bar. What she found made her stomach turn. It wasn't just one complaint. It was dozens. Customers, employees, even former employees, all reporting similar experiences with Janice's treatment. "She's rude and belittling. Doesn't treat anyone with respect, especially people of color." The words jumped off the screen, each one a dagger in Aliyah's heart. But it didn't stop there. Aliyah clicked on more links, each one leading to more accusations. Some were old, some recent, but they all followed the same pattern. Janice's discrimination had been noticed. It had been reported. But nothing was ever done. Aliyah clenched her fists. She clicked on the store's review page. One of the most recent complaints stood out. It was a scathing review left just a few weeks ago, describing a similar incident to her own. The difference: the customer had gone to the store's owner, Mr. Thompson. According to the review, he'd done nothing but dismiss the issue. The woman had written, "It's clear they don't care about what's right. They're just protecting their own." Aliyah leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. They're protecting her. They'd been protecting her. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. "You okay, baby?" Mama Pearl asked, her voice a soft, steady anchor in the storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Aliyah nodded, though the words caught in her throat. "There's more, Grandma, so much more. Janice, this isn't the first time. The store, it's like they've known what she's been doing, and they've just let her get away with it. Mama Pearl's face hardened. That's what they do. They protect their own, especially when they think they can't be touched. Alia's pulse quickened. She dug deeper, searching for more details, more concrete evidence. She found Mr. Thompson's name in a few old news articles. The local businessman, involved in charity events, known for his kindness and dedication to the community. But what if he's been hiding behind that mask all along? Alia thought. She found it. A connection. Janice wasn't just some random clerk. She had ties to the people who ran the town. She was close to Mr. Thompson, had been for years. Alia's stomach churned as she read the names of other local figures who had supported the store and its business practices, including some who had donated large sums to local causes. The system was rigged, and Alia had just uncovered the beginning of something far bigger than she had imagined. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. A text from Trey. Alia, you won't believe this, but Janice is claiming the video was edited. She's telling everyone you're just trying to ruin her life. Alia's hands shook as she read the message. Her stomach twisted with the sick realization that Janice was fighting back. She wasn't just trying to discredit Alia's experience. She was actively turning the tables, painting Alia as the villain, as the troublemaker. Alia's heart slammed against her chest. She had known this would happen. The people who had been silently complicit would stand up for her. They would fight to keep their secrets buried. She wasn't just up against Janice anymore. She was up against a whole system. You're doing the right thing, Mama Pearl said quietly, but firmly, as if reading her mind. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about making sure no one else has to go through this. Alia wiped her eyes, the tears threatening to spill. No one else, she thought. The weight of her own suffering wasn't enough to make her back down. But now there was something bigger at stake. She wasn't going to let Janice or the system silence her. Not now, not ever. The next morning, the video continued to gain traction. Alia felt the weight of every comment, every share. She didn't know if the world was ready to hear her story, but she had already taken the first step. The pressure was building. Janice's lies were spreading fast. People from all over the country were commenting, calling her out, accusing her of causing a scene. But a small voice inside her refused to stay quiet. Grandma, she whispered, looking up at Mama Pearl, her voice thick with emotion. We're going to take this all the way. I'm not stopping until everyone knows the truth. Mama Pearl nodded slowly, her eyes full of pride. You don't have to do it alone. We're in this together. And just like that, Alia knew. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was theirs, it was the community's. And it was a fight for justice that wouldn't end until the truth came out. The next step would be hard. It would be dangerous. But she couldn't back down now. The game had changed. The stakes had risen. She had uncovered something bigger than Janice. Something that couldn't be ignored. And now, there was no turning back. Alia sat at the edge of her bed, the weight of the decision heavy on her chest. She stared at her phone screen, eyes scanning the email in front of her. The cursor blinked, waiting for her to hit send, but she hesitated. It felt like she was about to step off a ledge. The complaint she was about to file wasn't just against Janice anymore. It was against a system that had been ignoring people like her for years. Every fiber of her being screamed to just walk away. But she couldn't. She wasn't going to let it slide anymore. The door creaked open, and Mama Pearl stepped in, her presence always steady, like an old oak tree. Alia's grandmother had been there for every step of her life. And yet, in this moment, Aliyah felt like she was about to face something so much bigger than either of them had ever expected. Mama Pearl looked at her granddaughter, her eyes sharp, reading the worry etched across Aliyah's face. "What's going on, baby?" Aliyah's voice caught in her throat. "I'm about to file the complaint. The formal one. Against Janice and the store." Mama Pearl didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. "You've thought this through?" Aliyah nodded. "I can't keep letting people like her walk all over me. It's not just about me anymore. It's bigger than that." Her grandmother's eyes softened. "You're right, but I need you to remember something. This is not going to be easy. You might not get the answers you want right away. But if you're sure, then you do it." Aliyah took a deep breath, her finger hovering over the send button. She thought about the years of quiet frustration, of hiding the hurt, of biting her tongue when she should have spoken up. But now, it was different. Now, it wasn't just her experience. It was everyone's. With a deep breath, Aliyah hit send. The days that followed felt like a blur. She had filed the complaint with the store's corporate office and with the local labor board. It was the first real step in standing up for herself. But it wasn't without consequences. The moment the complaint hit the system, she became a target. Janice's supporters rallied behind her. "Aliyah's just looking for attention," they said. "Why didn't she say something sooner?" The whispers grew louder, and Aliyah's life felt more exposed with each passing hour. But then, a glimmer of hope arrived. It came in the form of Erica Daniels, a young civil rights lawyer, who had seen Aliyah's story go viral online. Erica had been following the situation closely and reached out, offering her legal services pro bono. She had seen the video, the way Aliyah stood her ground, even when Janice tried to tear her down. Erica's voice over the phone was firm, confident. "Aliyah, what you're doing is important. This isn't just about you and Janice anymore. This is about setting a precedent. We're not going to let them sweep this under the rug." Aliyah's heart raced. She wasn't alone. She had someone in her corner now. But even with Erica's support, the road ahead wasn't easy. The legal battle would take time. The store, its owner, and Janice's allies were already preparing their counterattack. Then came the news. Janice had gone public, telling the local news that her actions had been misunderstood. She claimed she was just joking, and that Aliyah had overreacted. She painted herself as the victim, saying Aliyah was trying to destroy her career. The media ate it up, amplifying Janice's narrative. Local news outlets posted the interview, framing Aliyah's complaint as a young girl throwing accusations for attention. The backlash was swift. People who had previously supported Aliyah now started questioning her motives. "She's just trying to ruin someone's life," they said. "Why didn't she speak up sooner if it was such a big deal?" The comments hit Aliyah like a punch to the gut. She had expected resistance, but the force of it was overwhelming. It was as if she was fighting a battle on two fronts. Janice's twisted version of the truth, and the public's growing skepticism. Trey, who had been her biggest ally from the beginning, called her that night. "Aliyah, don't let them get to you," he said, his voice strained. "We have the truth on our side. You've got the whole world watching now." But Aliyah wasn't sure anymore. The weight of the media storm was too much. She couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. She sat on the couch, scrolling through the endless comments, the hateful ones, the ones that made her feel small. "She's just looking for a reason to complain," some said. "She should be grateful she's got that job." Aliyah slammed her phone down, her heart racing. "Why is everyone against me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Mama Pearl sat next to her, a hand on her shoulder. Because people are scared of what you represent, baby. You're not just a teenager standing up for herself. You're challenging a system that has been letting people like Janice get away with this for years. Tears welled up in Alia's eyes. I don't know if I can keep doing this, Grandma. You don't have to fight alone, Mama Pearl said, squeezing her hand. You've got your community behind you. You've got Trey. And most of all, you've got yourself. Don't lose sight of that. The next day, Trey reached out to Alia with some good news. He had organized a rally, a community event to show support for her, to fight back against Janice's lies, and to raise awareness about systemic racism in their town. He told her, "This is it. This is where we make our stand." Alia wasn't sure if she was ready for it. The idea of standing in front of so many people, with all eyes on her, terrified her. But something in Trey's voice made her feel like she had no choice. This was her chance to turn the tide. It was now or never. The rally was set for the weekend. The moment she stepped out of her house and saw the crowds gathering, the energy in the air was palpable. People she had known all her life, people she had never met, were all here. Signs reading "Justice for Alia" and "Say No to Racism" waved in the breeze. It was more than she ever could have imagined. Trey, with his camera slung over his shoulder, smiled at her from the crowd. "This is it," he said, his voice full of pride. "This is the moment." Alia felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but in that moment, she knew something had shifted. The voices of those who had stood by her, those who had shared her pain, were louder than the voices of those who wanted to silence her. Her legs felt weak as she approached the stage, but her heart was stronger than ever. The microphone was waiting. The crowd was waiting. She could feel their hope, their belief in her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "This is more than just one moment," she said into the microphone, her voice shaking at first, but growing steadier with each word. "This is about making sure no one has to feel what I've felt. No one should ever be silenced for standing up for their dignity." The crowd erupted in applause. For the first time in a long while, Alia didn't feel alone. She felt the power of community, of unity. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been treated like they didn't matter. But even as the rally continued, Alia knew the battle wasn't over. Janice's lies were still out there. The media storm hadn't died down. The legal fight was just beginning. But for the first time, Alia didn't feel like she was facing it alone. And for the first time, she felt like justice might actually be within reach. But as the rally wound down and the last cheers echoed into the evening, one thought lingered. Could she really win? Could one person, one community, really take down the deep-seated biases that had protected people like Janice for so long? The road ahead was still unclear, the stakes still high, and the fight was far from over. But in that moment, Alia knew one thing for sure. She wasn't backing down. Alia stood at the back of the courtroom, her fingers curled tightly around the handle of her purse. The buzz of conversations and the shuffle of papers felt distant, like she was in a dream, waiting for it to end. Her heart thudded in her chest, every beat echoing in her ears. She had known this day would come, the day when everything she had been fighting for would finally be laid bare. But now that it was here, she felt every ounce of fear and doubt come rushing at her. The room was packed. People had come from all over, the crowd split between supporters and detractors. She could see Trey in the front row, his eyes locked on her, his presence a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone. Mama Pearl was beside him, her usual calm demeanor replaced with a tightness that Aliyah knew was just as much fear as it was pride. Aliyah's eyes flicked to Janice, sitting at the other side of the room. Her posture was stiff, her face set in a mask of arrogance. The same Janice who had humiliated her at the store, the same Janice who had lied, manipulated, and tried to paint her as the villain. Today, though, there was something different about her. Her facade of confidence was starting to crack. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Everyone stood as he took his seat. Aliyah's breath caught as she realized this wasn't just a battle for herself anymore. This was about everything she had fought against for so long. This was her chance to expose the system, to show that it wasn't just one store, one employee. It was everything. "Let's begin," the judge said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. Aliyah's lawyer, Erica Daniels, stood up. Her voice was calm but sharp, like the edge of a blade. She was young, but she had a fire inside her that Aliyah had come to rely on in the weeks leading up to this day. The case had been building, piece by piece, every moment of Janice's cruelty now laid out in front of the court. "Your Honor," Erica began, "today we are here not just for Aliyah, but for everyone who has been silenced by prejudice. The defendant, Janice Coleman, claims that her actions were a misunderstanding. But the truth is that this is a pattern of discrimination that has been ignored for far too long." Aliyah's pulse quickened. She had heard Erica speak before. She had heard her arguments, her preparation, but something about hearing it now, in front of a room full of people, made it all feel so real. Erica's words were powerful, but it was the evidence she had gathered that made Aliyah's heart skip. Erica turned to the screen behind her. A video began to play. Trey's video. It started with Janice mocking Aliyah in the store, the same footage that had gone viral weeks ago. Aliyah watched herself, her face a mixture of hurt and defiance, as Janice's cruel words echoed in the room. The footage showed Janice's condescending attitude, her dismissiveness. But then, the video shifted. It showed Aliyah's accomplishments, her straighter grades, her community involvement, the way she had carried herself through everything that had happened. The audience's reaction was immediate. Aliyah could feel the shift. People were no longer looking at her like the girl who had caused trouble. They were looking at her as someone who had been wronged, someone who deserved justice. And then, as if the weight of that truth had finally dawned on the people in the room, the video played the next part. Trey's voice, narrating how the store's owner had been informed about Janice's actions, but had done nothing to intervene. The room went silent. The evidence, the truth, it was all laid out now. Erica stood back, allowing the video to speak for itself. Her gaze never left Janice, whose face had gone pale. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap, her breathing shallow. It was as though the walls were closing in on her. She had underestimated Aliyah. She had thought she could get away with it. "Your Honor," Erica continued, her voice now laced with finality, "Janice's actions were not isolated. They were part of a pattern of racial discrimination that this store, and the people running it, have allowed to fester for far too long. We've shown you the evidence. We've shown you the history of complaints against Janice, ignored by the management. And we've shown you how the owner, Mr. Thompson, knew about this and chose to protect her instead of doing what was right." The room stared. Aliyah could see the people around her shifting, the weight of the truth sinking in. She could feel it too, the realization that this wasn't just a fight for her dignity. It was a fight for the dignity of every person who had been treated like they didn't belong. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Then the moment came. A witness stepped forward. A former employee of the store. A man who had left a few months earlier after reporting Janice's behavior to management. His voice was steady, but there was a tremor in it that betrayed the years of fear and frustration. "I reported her," he said, his eyes meeting Alia's. "I told them what she was doing. The way she treated people. But nothing ever happened. I didn't want to lose my job, so I left. But when I saw what happened to her, I couldn't stay silent anymore." Janice's jaw clenched. Alia could see her physically shrinking, her once sturdy posture faltering under the weight of the evidence piling up. Her lies were unraveling. But it wasn't over. Mr. Thompson stood up to speak, trying to distance himself from Janice's actions. "I wasn't aware of these allegations," he claimed, his voice trembling under the scrutiny. "Janice's behavior is not reflective of the values we uphold at this store." The room was buzzing with disbelief. The store owner's attempts to save face only made things worse. His own internal emails, presented by Erica, told a different story. Emails that proved he had been informed of Janice's behavior multiple times and had done nothing to intervene. The facade of innocence he tried to put up crumbled in front of everyone. Alia felt a surge of anger, but it was tempered with something else. A sense of triumph. The truth was coming out, piece by piece. And then, as the room settled, it was her turn. Alia stood up, her legs shaky, but her resolve stronger than ever. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had fought for this moment. She had earned the right to speak. She stepped up to the podium, the eyes of the entire room on her. For a moment, she could feel the weight of it, the pressure, the judgment, the fear. But then she remembered Mama Pearl's words. "You're not just speaking for yourself. You're speaking for everyone who's ever been silenced." "I never wanted this," Alia began, her voice steady. "But I couldn't stay quiet anymore. What happened to me at that store wasn't just about a rude clerk. It wasn't just about a bad day. It was about a system that lets people like her, people like Mr. Thompson, get away with it. For too long, people like me have been treated like we don't belong, like we don't matter. But I matter, and I'm not going to let anyone make me feel like I don't." The room was dead silent. Alia's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She could feel the weight of everything she had been through, all of it culminating in this one moment. It wasn't just about her. It was about change. It was about making sure no one else ever had to go through what she had. "I stand here today not just for me," she continued, her voice breaking slightly but growing stronger with each word, "but for every person who has been told they're not enough. For every person who has been made to feel small. We deserve better. And we're going to make sure we get it." Tears welled in Alia's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She was stronger than that now. The silence in the room was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. They were all waiting, just like her, waiting for what came next. And in that moment, Alia knew the battle wasn't over. But the fight for justice, that had just begun. The courtroom felt different now. The air had changed, heavier, quieter. The judge's gavel fell, and in that moment, Alia felt the weight of every moment that had led up to this. Every word spoken, every piece of evidence presented, and every voice raised in support. The room had been full of anticipation, but now it was full of silence. A silence that stretched on forever as the judge prepared to deliver his verdict. Alia's hands were clammy, her chest tight with a mix of fear and hope. She stood next to Erica Daniels, her lawyer, who had fought so tirelessly for her. Across the room, Janice sat, her face pale, her posture rigid. The store owner, Mr. Thompson, was sitting beside her, a man who had hidden behind his wealth and position for too long. Alia's gaze flicked to him, the anger she had felt for weeks bubbling up again. But this time she didn't let it overtake her. She wasn't the scared girl anymore. She wasn't the one who was small. She had taken her power back. The judge cleared his throat, and the entire room held its breath. The allegations against Janice Coleman are substantiated, the judge said, his voice steady, but with the authority that made everyone in the room lean forward. It is clear that she has violated the rights of Ms. Alia Johnson. Effective immediately, Janice Coleman will lose her position at the store. Furthermore, the store's owner, Mr. Thompson, will be required to undergo mandatory bias training, and the store will be fined for its failure to address these issues promptly. Alia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't allowed herself to fully believe it, not until now. This was happening. This was real. Your Honor, Erica spoke, her voice cutting through the stillness. We ask that the store be required to make meaningful changes to ensure that no other employee or customer faces this kind of treatment again. We cannot allow this to be a one-time consequence. The change must be permanent. The judge nodded. Agreed. I will require the store to implement diversity and inclusion training for all staff, effective immediately. It was done. The fight had been long and grueling, but it had paid off. Janice's smug demeanor shattered as the reality set in. The store owner, Mr. Thompson, sat frozen, his face now a mask of disbelief. Alia felt a sense of victory she hadn't known she could feel. And yet, there was still a part of her that wanted to shout, to laugh, to say, "I told you so." But she didn't. She stood there, proud and steady, knowing that the battle was never just about her. It was about every person who had been made to feel small, every person who had been silenced by the weight of prejudice. When they left the courtroom, the world outside felt different. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the city streets. It was like the world had taken a deep breath. Alia walked out with her head held high, tray by her side. The documentary he had been working on, the one that had followed her journey from humiliation to triumph, was about to premiere at a film festival. Trey had captured everything. The pain, the struggle, the small victories, and now the justice. It was a story that wasn't just hers. It was a story for everyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or silenced. As they walked down the steps, Alia's phone buzzed. It was a text from Mama Pearl. "I'm so proud of you, baby. You did it." Tears stung Alia's eyes as she read the message. She felt the weight of everything that had brought her to this moment. She wasn't just proud of herself. She was proud of her grandmother, of Trey, of everyone who had stood by her. She had made it. And now, so much was possible. Days later, the news came in. Alia had been selected for a scholarship from a national foundation. Her story, her bravery, had inspired them, and she was going to receive the funding she needed to attend college. Her future had been secured, and with it, a new chapter. The scholarship was more than just money. It was validation. It was proof that she had done something meaningful, something that mattered. The store, under new management, reopened its doors, with a new pledge to serve the community inclusively. Mr. Thompson was no longer part of the operation, and the changes that were promised were already being implemented. The damage done could never be fully erased, but it was a step forward. It was a sign that things could change. That things would change. Tree's documentary, titled Voices of Change, premiered to critical acclaim. It was more than just a documentary about one young woman's fight for justice. It was a call to action, a plea for people to see the truth, to listen, and to do better. It won awards, and as Trey stood on stage to accept one of those awards, he turned to Aliyah in the crowd and gave her a small, knowing smile. She had helped create this. Her bravery had given it life. Aliyah watched him with a swelling sense of pride. Trey had been there from the beginning, capturing everything. He had been the one to show the world what she was truly made of. He had helped her turn her pain into power. And now, the world was watching. He was doing what he had always wanted to do, changing lives with his art. And Aliyah, she was just beginning. The journey wasn't over. She knew there would always be challenges, always more work to be done. But now, she was ready for it. She was strong. She was prepared. And most importantly, she knew that she had already made a difference. She had stood up for herself. And in doing so, she had shown the world what resilience, dignity, and courage looked like. As the ceremony ended, and people gathered around, congratulating Trey, Aliyah stood quietly at the back. She looked out over the crowd, feeling the weight of everything. She had always dreamed of moments like this, but she had never expected them to come like this. But here they were. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Mama Pearl. "You've made history, baby. And you've made me proud." Aliyah smiled, holding the phone close to her chest. History wasn't just made by big moments. It was made by the quiet, steady steps that led up to them. And as Aliyah took another deep breath, she knew that this was only the beginning. There was still so much more to do. But now, she was ready. And the world was watching. The sun was setting low behind the trees, casting a soft golden light over the porch. Aliyah sat on the old wooden swing, her legs tucked beneath her. The familiar creak of the chain soothing in the stillness of the evening. The newspaper lay in her lap, its headline bold and clear. Aliyah Johnson fights for justice and wins. She ran her fingers over the photo on the front page. Her smiling face, her eyes filled with determination, framed by the words that told her story. She hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't asked to be a symbol of something larger than herself. But here she was, on the other side of it, changed, scarred, and stronger than she had ever thought possible. Behind her, she heard the soft shuffle of Mama Pearl's slippers on the porch steps. The familiar sound always brought her comfort, like a soft anchor pulling her back to the center of her world. Mama Pearl settled beside her, her weathered hands resting on her lap as she glanced down at the newspaper. "You've made it, baby," Mama Pearl said, her voice thick with pride. Aliyah nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought back to the days of doubt, when she wasn't sure if standing up for herself was worth it, when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear. The late-night phone calls with Trey, when her confidence wavered, and the world seemed determined to shut her down. The viral video, the legal battle, the media storm. All of it had felt so overwhelming. But now, as she sat on the porch with the sun dipping behind the trees, she could feel the weight of it lifting. She had fought, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. "Mama Pearl," Aliyah said softly, her voice breaking slightly. "I've been thinking about everything. The scholarship, the documentary. It's so much more than I ever imagined." Mama Pearl smiled, her eyes twinkling in the fading light. "I always knew you had it in you, Aliyah. You've got the fire. You always have." She reached over and squeezed Aliyah's hand. "That fire comes from me, you know." Aliyah chuckled, feeling the sting of tears at the back of her throat. "I never really thought about it like that. But you're right. Everything I did, everything I am, it's because of you. Mama Pearl's smile lightened. You're my legacy, child. I've been teaching you how to stand tall your whole life. Don't forget where that strength comes from. Aliyah gazed out across the yard, where the community had gathered in the distance. The rally, the protests, the support that had grown around her. It hadn't been just about her. It had been about the people who had rallied behind her, who had fought alongside her. She saw Trey standing near the crowd, his camera in hand, capturing every moment. He had been there from the beginning, filming, documenting, sharing her story with the world. You know, Trey's been amazing through all of this, Aliyah said, watching him for a moment longer. He's not just my friend. He's become my partner. We've been talking about working on more projects together. Stories that need to be told. Mama Pearl nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. That boy's got a gift. And so do you. You two will do great things together. You've already started changing the world. Aliyah smiled, feeling the truth of her grandmother's words settled deep in her heart. She thought about the future, about the college she would soon attend, about the opportunities now within her reach. But it wasn't just about her future. It was about the future of everyone who had stood beside her. The community that had risen up in support. The people who had seen her not as just a troublemaker or attention seeker, but as someone fighting for a better world. Trey's documentary had won awards, but it wasn't just the recognition that mattered. It was the message. It was the change. The way it had sparked conversations across the country about microaggressions, systemic racism, and the power of standing up for what's right. Aliyah felt a surge of gratitude as she thought about how far they had come. She never could have predicted it, how one moment of courage could set off a chain of events that would ripple through her life and beyond. She looked down at the newspaper again, her gaze lingering on the headline. The words justice and redemption still felt surreal. But they were real now. They weren't just words on paper. They were truths she had fought for. Aliyah shifted slightly on the swing, the cool breeze rustling through the trees. We've only just begun, she said quietly, almost to herself. Mama Pearl turned to her, a proud smile spreading across her face. That's right, baby. We've only just begun. Aliyah let the words sink in, knowing they were more than just a hopeful phrase. They were a promise, to herself, to Mama Pearl, to the community, and to everyone who had ever felt powerless. They had started something, and it wasn't over. The camera panned over the rally, capturing the faces of people from all walks of life. The crowd was diverse, young, old, black, white, Hispanic, Asian. A sea of faces united by one cause. Aliyah realized that this wasn't just about the fight she had won. This was about the change they were all creating together. The unity they had forged. The hope that had blossomed out of pain. Her gaze returned to Trey, who caught her eye from across the crowd. He gave her a small wave, his expression full of pride and understanding. She could see it in his face. He knew. He understood. They had started something that couldn't be undone. They had ignited a fire, and it was only just beginning to spread. As the camera zoomed in on Aliyah's face, she felt a quiet strength within her. A legacy had been built, and it wasn't just hers. It was Mama Pearl's, it was Trey's, it was the community's. It was the strength of every person who had come together to fight for something better. We've only just begun, Aliyah whispered again, as if affirming it to the world. And she knew, deep in her soul, that this was just the beginning of a much bigger story. One she would help write, with courage, with love, and with the power of unity. The camera slowly pulled back, the sun setting behind them, casting a warm golden glow over the scene. The rally continued in the background, a symbol of the change they had sparked, the hope they had ignited, and the future they would continue to build together. And with that, the screen faded to black. The journey had only just begun, and the world was watching.